Join us today in the spirit of March Madness as the Deer Labs at Mississippi State University and the University of Florida highlight results from a head-to-head competition among groups of similar forages. Everybody wants to know what deer want to eat. We try to manage to improve it, the supply of it on our properties. The brackets are set, the deer are ready to eat, and we hope you and your friends have filled out your brackets. Our bracket includes 32 forages broken into 4 regions. Each region is a different category of forage. We let our adult bucks at the MSU Deer Research Facility decide on their favorite forages. We'll travel down the road to the final forage with 4 lead-in shows, each one highlighting one of the categories, and then ending in a final showdown among champions from each category. Other shows will highlight competition among a combination of 8 food plot and mineral stump forages, 8 vines, and 8 forbs. And today's show, we're going to cover the meat and potatoes of a deer forage universe, upright woody browse. Now, each show includes a special guest host. And today we are joined by someone who specializes in the production of browse plants, tree guru Dudley Phelps with Mossy Oak Native Nursery. Dudley, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. And when I first heard about this, I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I'm honored to be here. So we've been planting trees in pots and then putting them out in the field for deer and other wildlife to enjoy. And part of that is trying to keep the deer away from some of those plants while we get them going. And so I do feel like I have a little bit of an edge. I've been planting these things and having to keep the deer away. So I've made a lot of mental notes over the years. So when I did see the category and the species on the list, I immediately went to about 4 of them, and it was tough to narrow it down, but I think I've got a good guess.
Yeah. So it sounded like a challenge, Dudley.
Yeah.
You got the edge.
Marcus, we may have a ringer here.
Yeah, I have no doubt that we do.
Well, y'all, all of our regional brackets contain top-rated forages, so this really is a battle of the best against the best. Let's let Bronson, Scott Van Pelt Strickland, and Marcus Lashley break down today's bracket. And Dudley, if you join in and add any of your special knowledge and tidbits.
Sure thing.
So thanks, everybody, for joining us. So we're going to do the browse bracket today, and we did a couple of things. One, we picked forages that were locally abundant during the time that we did this. So this was during the early growing season months. And we also wanted to pick things that are widely available to deer. Wherever you're at, you probably have a species representing the genera that we have on here. So they're pretty abundant where we're at, and probably a local favorite for you, at least one of the species. So that's how we came up with these 8. These are all, again, really good forages, and these are the ones that we decided would be most representative of some of the top browse plants for deer that we had access to. So can we look at the first one? Right now I'm going to tell you about Blackgum, and we picked this one because it is one of the favorites, I think, for deer browse. I see seedlings of this all over the place. It's abundant in our area, and it's almost always browsed, whether it's been top killed by fire or it's just a seedling germinating the year of. Normally deer are taking advantage of it if they can reach it. It also has a lot of other great characteristics that are beneficial for wildlife, and compared to some of the other forages and the forbs and food plots, it may not look very high on some of these nutritional metrics, but for a browse plant, it's pretty solid in each of those categories.
You know, one thing, Marcus, that's kind of interesting, I know this was my journey with Blackgum, is that it's not as charismatic in terms of identification like a lot of species. And I bet a lot of people, until you learn to identify it, don't really know what it is. But once you learn how to identify it and you start looking for it, you're going to notice that deer utilize it very heavily.
I was going to say it. That was one of the first plants that stumped me when I was a dendro student at Mississippi State. It was like I'd never seen it before. And Dr. Evans pointed it out, and I've known what it is and been fascinated with it ever since. It's one of my favorite wildlife plants. It's also dioecious, like a persimmon. So you have male and female plants.
Very cool. Let's look at the next one. So you probably have a dogwood species nearby. It may not be silky dogwood if you don't live in this part of the world, but this is one that's really abundant to us here. And I think there are some very interesting things about this plant. Notice the metrics on nutritional value are pretty solid for a browse, but one that we don't have on here that I think is important is this plant hoards calcium, and that's a really cool characteristic. And I think it's all around is a really good wildlife plant and pretty, and a lot of people like to have it around in general for lots of reasons like that.
And a lot of people generally don't think of it as a forage. I think most people, in the wildlife world know about the fruiting and how different wildlife use that. But yeah, the tendency to really concentrate calcium in the leaves makes it a contender, and deer utilize it really often.
Yeah, that's a good one. And if you don't have it on your place, it's easy to plant. You can just take cuttings of dogwoods and they'll root. It's very commonly used up north.
Cool. All right, let's take a look at the next one. All right, white oak. So most of us probably think about the mast produced by white oak. And I know I think about it plenty, and I know that Dudley does as well, because I've been to Mossy Oak Native Nurseries, and I see all your, you've got these planted all over the place for for fun and to sell, it looks like. So, but I do the same thing in my backyard where I've got all kinds of white oaks planted all over the place in pots and in the yard. And I typically think of the plant for that reason, but deer do browse it pretty heavily as well when it's available in the understory as seedlings. And in some places that's even a concern for oak regeneration. So I definitely see it utilized for the leaf biomass by deer commonly, and for that reason, I think it could be a contender. It does contain tannins, which are an anti-herbivory defense, but deer also have a defense to counter that. So pretty cool interaction between those plants, but I definitely could see this being one of the top forages.
Yeah, and this one, is just the opposite of blackgum in terms of the leaf. I think everybody that deer hunts is going to be able to identify a white oak. And so we're so used to looking for it out in the woods, but we're looking at it from a perspective of acorn production and then also hunting near it when they're producing. But yeah, we can't neglect either is the growing tree or leaves that are in reach. Because of the nutritional quality, it's another example of a browse species that's utilized throughout the U.S.
No doubt. And, we can argue the importance of the acorns, being that they may have bad years or, drop only a portion of the year in the fall. But all that carpet of seedlings on the ground under the tree, even in areas where the habitat, there's not a lot of cover, not a lot of, you can see a long way in the woods, but if you can find a productive white oak, you can generally find a lot of browse in the form of its seedlings growing on the ground.
Very cool.
And those seedlings will live for 2 or 3 years. They're shade intolerant, but they'll live for several years and provide that early forage.
Mm-hmm. So this one I think is really interesting for a couple of reasons, but when I was a graduate student, I made it a point when I was studying deer diet selection, I made it a point to taste every food that the deer were willing to taste. And this is one that gave me a not so fond memory. When I tasted winged sumac, this was the worst tasting plant. Now, if you're going to do this at home, don't swallow it. But I don't recommend you try this, but I felt like if I was going to study deer diet selection, I wouldn't fully appreciate diet selection unless I tried what they were trying to. So that's what I was thinking. And when I took a bite of this one, I will never, ever forget it. It was the most foul, horrible tasting thing that I have ever tasted, bar none, winged sumac, which is just really interesting to me. But for that reason, I don't know why deer would want to eat it, but I really commonly see it browsed in, relatively high abundance, just on any property I go on. I see, it's not standing out for its browse pressure, but it certainly is getting browsed when it's available.
Sometimes we have no idea why they eat what they eat, but in layman's terms, I think that somehow their brain is connected to their stomach, and something's telling them to eat it. Whether it tastes bad or not. But I know the fruits have when they make that sticky trichome on the fruit, you can make a lemonade substitute. And in Mediterranean foods, if you like hummus, that's usually what the red stuff is on top of the hummus.
Huh.
So it has a lot of uses, and its bees love it. But I've definitely seen it browsed, all the different sumac species.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told Marcus this, at least publicly, but Marcus, you're a real nerd. You know that? I don't know many people that would sample all of the forages like that, but it shows your dedication to science.
Yeah, there were like 90 genera represented in that forage trial for me.
Yeah, I guess I'll just throw it in. To me, it's not one of those go-to browse plants. It's not one that I immediately think of. But when you're in the field and you see it, you definitely will commonly see it browsed and utilized. So it's a real good pick.
And Dudley, about your point about you never know what a deer is necessarily going to want to eat on a particular property, we might refer our listeners to a recent podcast by Deer University where we talked about diet selection and a study that we conducted here with Dr. Lashley and Strickland and myself and Jacob Dykes, looking at a variety of minerals and nutrient factors that relate to diet selection. So y'all listen to Deer University podcast, one of the most recent episodes.
Okay.
Beautyberry. I think this one is a local favorite, at least. I know it's has a real aesthetic that people love, no matter how old you are or where your background's from. People seem to just love to have this plant around. And I definitely see it browsed regularly. If you actually fill the stem or you kind of rub the leaves, it has this really sweet scent to it. So you should try that if you have any of it around. It's a really nice scent. Some people will even use it in their potpourri or something like that. But I see it readily browsed. Again, from the leaf standpoint, this one doesn't taste very good to me, but apparently it does for deer.
Well, it's easy to see why it gets its name, right? I mean, it is absolutely a beautiful plant. And I think I know why Marcus likes it so much. It responds really well to fire. And I know even in my backyard, I have tinkered with this. And I burn some in my backyard. And it always responds really, really well in that new growth. Whenever we have some suburban deer move through, they will always hammer it. And then when I'm out in the field, I routinely see it browsed as well. So yeah, another solid forage.
Yeah, it's a great one. Another multifaceted plant for wildlife. It's not just deer. It's loved by all types of wildlife, insects, everything. I've even seen jelly made out of it. And folks are using it for insecticide, like a mosquito repellent as well. There's a substance in the leaves that they've extracted. Calicarpanol, I think, is the name of it.
Calicarpanol. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a look at the next one. So Eastern Redbud, this is another one of those that has a real aesthetic. You see it planted commonly in people's yards, and it's really early flowering and the nice shaped leaves. My mother, for one, has always pointed out how much she loves this plant just because it's a heart-shaped leaf. So we have this picture right here showing you that up close. But I think of this plant as kind of a sleeper. So, that I don't typically think of redbud when I think of deer browse, but when I think about this plant and going out and looking along a right of way or when it's a seedling, it is pretty common that I see it get browsed. And when you look at the metrics on the nutrients, it tends to not be as high as some of the other browse species, but I can't deny that something in it is making deer want to browse it, at least to some degree. Another interesting thing about it is it also is a legume, like some of the other forbs that we've talked about. So I think that's an interesting characteristic about the redbud that separates it from the other trees.
Marcus, what I think of redbud, why it's so sought after, is that it makes for a beautiful backdrop if you have successfully harvested a turkey. If you notice that it's blooming this time of year, and it's that beautiful purple, pink, and everybody, if you see one in the woods behind you blooming, that's where you set up your photo for your turkey, your turkey photo. But another common. I don't think this is a real obvious choice, and I think, Marcus, it's because it is so common. Once you learn how to identify it, you'll see it in the mid-story and understory often, and sometimes you'll see it browse somewhat, and sometimes not. But still, definitely a solid pick.
It seems to have a knack for getting away from their mouth quickly. Like maybe being a nitrogen fixer, it encourages it to grow fast. But when you see them in that seedling stage, or in a shrubby, shorter stage, it does get browsed. But it's really good at getting out of the reach of their mouth pretty quickly.
Also, we have persimmon, and this one, this is for me, one of the most well-rounded trees. It grows below the low water or the high water mark and lake beds all the way up. I've seen it on some of the driest ridges, and you can use the wood for all kinds of things, and it's hard enough to make a golf club head out of. So a lot of cool characteristics like that. And then the fruit. This is my favorite fruit in the woods. I love eating persimmon. If you take a bite of one before it's ripe, that's not so good. It has an astringence that makes you get cotton mouth and really dry and feel like you can't swallow. But once they've ripened, it's one of the highest sugar contents in the fruit of any fruit out in the woods. So that's probably why I like it so much. But in terms of the browse, this is another one that I don't typically think of right away. But if you actually go out and start paying attention during the early summer, in particular, when we collected these forages, it's really common just in the understory, and it's very commonly browsed when it's available. It also tends to be a little bit higher on some of the nutritional metrics than some of the other browses.
Yeah, Marcus, this is one probably doesn't get credit for as a browse, because everybody, especially if you bow hunt, you need to learn how to identify persimmon, because that's one of the most strategic setups you can have as a bow hunter is a ripe persimmon where it's dropping. Marcus, we all, again, most of us know we've had the bad experience of a green persimmon versus a ripe one, and I agree with you. What did the leaves taste like? You mentioned you tasted everything. What's your interpretation of the leaf?
Yeah, they're non-remarkable. I don't have a strong aversion to them or a strong attraction to them either. They were just leaves.
Yeah, it's a really cool plant, and I mentioned earlier it's dioecious, so it's gonna, some plants are gonna be males, some will be females. Seems like you find more males in the wild. My theory is that the females have to use a lot of energy to make it, but they're making fruits, and so they typically run out of steam before they get to the top of the canopy.
We have a persimmon tree just associated with our deer research facility, and it's funny, in the early fall, it seems like the deer are waiting around underneath it, and they're trying to catch them on the first bounce when they hit. I mean, they just love that fruit.
Do we have any footage of that, Steve?
I'll work on it.
Yeah, great. All right, I think we have one more, right? Yeah. So this is, again, one that people probably don't think necessarily of as a browse plant, but they probably see the fruit widely available. And it's no question, is this an important plant species for wildlife for that fruit? And I think anybody would agree with that. But another one of those that is very common in our part of the world, and especially on right-of-ways or on the side of the road, when I'm looking, I see this really common, and it's very common that it's being browsed.
I'm going to have a tough time with my pick because I have elderberry in my backyard. And so I see firsthand when the suburban deer move through, I can tell when they're in the neighborhood. I can go to that plant and know there are deer around because they selected. And yeah, it's one of those, again, it's probably nondescript to most people until it flowers and fruits. And then you figure out, oh yeah, that's an elderberry. So I've got to be careful here of not letting my backyard experience influence me too much on my pick, because yeah, elderberry is a solid choice.
Yeah, it seems if, in the southern, at least for me, driving in the southern parts of the state, it's almost everywhere, on the edge of ditches and things, like even on the way to New Orleans. But, it's a really popular plant right now because of its medicinal qualities for humans. And I even have some growing in my yard. And like you said, Bronson, the deer just nail it. I have to protect it.
Well, guys, our listeners thought they were just going to learn about deer forage today. And yet, wow, what added value. Now you know several browse plants that you do not want to add to your salad. You know something that you could use to add to your potpourri, and you may even find a new use as an insecticide to keep the mosquitoes away. So look at all this added value.
And, they learned the term dioecious.
Yes,
from Dudley.
Yeah, yep. 2 houses. Always remember that.
So we've got a great selection of winning forages here. All of them are winners. And that's why we put them in the list to begin with. Let's see what our experts pick for the winner out of this category. Bronson, you want to lead us off?
Not really, but I guess I'm going to have to jump out there first and make my pick. So, like I discussed, there was a lot of forages that I know are good. I mean, I see them firsthand. But what really led me to pick what I picked was how common, when I'm in the woods, how often am I seeing this particular browse species browsed? And for me, an example might be beautyberry. I see a lot of beautyberry. I see it browsed commonly, but sometimes I don't. The one that I think, in my experience, I've seen browsed most often is blackgum. So blackgum is going to be my pick.
Good choice.
Very good.
Marcus, what do you think?
Yeah, so Bronson, I think you're right about blackgum in terms of one that really is super commonly browsed. The seedlings of blackgum are definitely one of those. However, I decided to go a little different way than you did. There's one of these that sticks out to me for a reason, and I actually went and found some data on it to figure out, just how much it stuck out. And for me, my pick is dogwood. And I picked dogwood because of that. We talked about it hoarding calcium. And for those of you that aren't familiar, that's a nutrient that accumulates in the leaf tissue. It's not mobilized in the plant. So basically, you tend to see that increase in abundance in the leaf as the leaf matures. But we all know deer aren't walking around eating the mature leaves, right? So when this, we were selecting the deer parts that deer want to eat for this study. And this plant, if you look at how much calcium it has in its tender, succulent leaf that deer are eating, it is more than tenfold than all of the rest of the competitors. And for me, that is that is sticking out so much, especially for deer that are growing antlers. Calcium is obviously important, a part of that. So to me, that made this one kind of stand out, and the reason that I had to pick it, that the calcium is just literally off the charts.
Well, Bronson, there he gets that deer ecology stuff going, and that's some great rationale there, Marcus. Dudley, what about your pick?
I had a tough time. Dogwood, Blackgum. I kind of had white oak in my head as my wild card. Honestly, I went back and forth between Dogwood and Blackgum for a while, but then I just had to go with my gut. I've been watching deer browse elderberry hard in the wild, and then I tried to grow it in my backyard with a lot of other plants, including white oaks and blackgum. Blackgum's my favorite tree. If you ever ask me, that's my favorite. But elderberry, I think is going to be my final answer because of just how hard of a time I have getting it established. So that's elderberry's my pick.
All right, good deal. Well, I'm thinking about several different views on these different plants. We've got sumac and beautyberry, which are very fire-friendly plants, and they tend to resprout really well on burned plots. And we know from previous research here at the Deer Lab that these recently burned plots, are highly, highly attractive to deer. So I'm thinking deer are going to be really attracted to these plants. However, we didn't collect them from a recent burn. We collected them just from an unburned area. And I'm thinking if they're hit that hard after a burn, they probably have some anti-herbivory compounds within them that might make them a little less tasty. And maybe that's what Marcus was finding out when he tried those sumac leaves. Maybe that was part of that secondary anti-herbivory compound approach. And we've also got white oak and persimmon, and I think of those as great seed producers and just relished by deer. But this isn't about the seeds today, and so that brings me down to like blackgum, dogwood, redbud, and these are plants that if they're going to be eaten by deer, that's going to be for their forage value. So I'm really liking this group to kind of focus my selection on. And I've learned a lot about blackgum listening to Marcus. Marcus has helped me understand the value of blackgum. So I'm joining my cohort Bronson and going with blackgum as my regional bracket winner. It takes a lot of hard work to put on a production like our experiment that we did. And so let's recognize the hardworking graduate students that are doing all the behind the scenes work. Let's take a quick look at some of the activities associated with the game day preparation. The sampling bins have to be put out and filled with forages. Now we run 8 at a time, and so we have 16 showing there, and that's because we duplicate the availability so that there's not competition over the individual forages. And then we let the deer eat for a controlled amount of time and then weigh the bags after. We weigh them before, we weigh them after, so we know how much they ate. And that's how we base our study here and the results. So let's look now at some of the head-to-head competition, shall we say, antler-to-antler matchup going on, and see some of the highlights of the foraging activity by the deer.
I'm trying to see which one they're eating. I can tell based on the color.
You can't change your pick now, Marcus. Too bad.
Yeah, and you might be able to identify a leaf, but we chop them up so they'd all be the same size. So
exactly, yeah,
that complicates it too. And we have really intelligent deer at the MSU Deer Lab, so we couldn't label them with the names because we didn't want them to.
They were reading them.
Read it, yeah.
Well, you can see even with this deer right there, it just went and smelled several before it actually took a bite of anything. So it really, the deer are seeking through that and actually choosing based on what they like.
They're also attracted to the drone that we use to produce this part. So what did our deer select? What are the most desirable forages out of this bracket of 8? What did we learn? Is Bronson right? Is Marcus right? Or is Dudley? Oh, dogwood.
It was the calcium. I told you guys.
Calcium. Wow. That was a sleeper for me.
Yeah. Well, I think even on, we've provided these profiles of these forages for everybody. And we have a picture in one of them of me as a graduate student collecting dogwood. And I believe it was at the same time that I actually tasted it. Another one that it tastes like a cobweb. That's what I describe. So
have you tasted cobwebs too?
I have. I don't want to tell you why, but there's another experiment. It's a completely different thing. But if you take the leaves on these, one way that you can identify it is if you pull the leaves apart, it has these little white fibers in it. And I think we have a picture of that on the slide so you can take a look at it. But it sort of tastes like that looks to me. And I don't know, seeing that one nutrient that, is an important one for deer during that time off the charts. I mean, it's not even comparable to anything else in the browse class. So that for me, there's no other choice really.
Yeah. And the time of year that we did this study is peak antler growth. They're really adding that calcium into their antlers, and bucks during this time actually go into an osteoporosis process where they pull minerals out of their bones to support the rapid antler growth. So that really makes a lot of sense, Marcus. I wasn't thinking about that calcium content when I made my pick, but as soon as you said that, I thought, wow, I wish I had picked that one.
Yeah, I thought you were picking an underdog,
sense.
Marcus.
Yeah, I've got a few things up my sleeve, Bronson, and I know you were expecting to win outright and be right on all of them and everybody else be wrong. But you can't always count me out.
And they do say you are what you eat. So maybe eating all those leaves had something to play here.
Maybe that's why I'm such a nerd. All these chemicals from these plants have kind of altered the way I'm thinking about things.
Passed on that nutritional wisdom.
Yeah, well, that sure was fun, guys.
It sure was. We learned a lot today about browse forages, and so we hope you'll join us for our next show as we travel down the road to the final forage. Thanks for listening.